So, what just happened in banking? Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where we help you upgrade your English with current events and trending topics. JR is the producer, and he has uploaded the full lesson to plainenglish.com/562. Coming up today, the American and European economies are not in recession. Companies are not failing. People are paying back their loans. So why are so many banks in trouble? To understand today's lesson, you'll want to go back and listen to the very timely lesson number 540, where we talked about how banks fail. But today, I'll tell you what happened at Silicon Valley Bank and at Credit Suisse. They are two different but related stories. In the second half of the lesson, we'll talk about the English expression herd mentality. Let's get going. Credit Suisse, a 167-year-old bank in Switzerland, failed over a weekend in March. Silicon Valley Bank, the bank many of your favorite tech companies use, failed in March too. And that wasn't all. Silvergate Bank, a bank used by crypto firms, also collapsed. What's going on? If you listened to lesson 540, you know banks can have either a liquidity crisis or a solvency crisis. And the short answer is that the banks that failed in March 2023 had liquidity crises. So let's start at the beginning. Remember that banks take deposits from customers that open bank accounts. And they don't just put that money in a safe. They lend the money out to people who want to borrow money. Businesses, real estate developers, home buyers, what have you. Depositors have the right to request their money at any time. But the borrowers don't have to pay their loans back for a long time. So the whole thing depends on depositors not asking for all their money all at once. And most of the time, they don't. Well, Silicon Valley Bank is a bank in, you guessed it, Silicon Valley. Many of your favorite tech companies banked there, as did their venture capital backers. But Silicon Valley Bank didn't make a lot of loans. Instead of making loans, Silicon Valley Bank took their deposits and bought a lot of long-term U.S. Treasury bonds. A bond is a promise to pay the money back with interest every year. So the bank owed money to the depositors, and the government owed money to Silicon Valley Bank, and everything was in balance. Now, the market assumes that Treasury bonds will never default. The government will never not pay the bonds back. But, and this is a big but, Treasury bonds can go down in value. What happens is, if interest rates go up, then the market value of a bond goes down. Now, you can still hold on to the bond until it matures. No problem. Without losing any money. No problem perfectly safe and sound. But if you have to sell a bond before it matures, you won't get all your money back. And this is the problem that Silicon Valley Bank faced. They took customer deposits and they bought a lot of long-term bonds when interest rates were low. Well, then interest rates went up and the market value of their bonds went down. That wasn't bad in and of itself. They could still hold on to their bonds and get all their money back at the end of the term if that's what they wanted. They disclosed this in a footnote in their financial statements. Yawn. But a few people read the footnotes. Who knew? And those few people moved to the exits. They moved their money out of the bank. There were some emails or messages among friends, and there might have been a tweet, and then more and more people started pulling their own money out of the bank. And since many of the customers were all in the same state, in the same industry, with friends in common, following the same Twitter accounts, the herd mentality took over. Everyone rushed to the exits, and Silicon Valley Bank ran out of cash to give its depositors. Now note, this was a liquidity crisis, not a solvency crisis. The bank had the treasury bonds to match the depositors' requests. They just didn't have access to that value right away. And if they needed to get the money right away, they would have to sell the bonds at a loss. So the government stepped in and did its duty to save the bank at the last minute. Now, Credit Suisse is a 167-year-old bank in Switzerland. It started by lending money to develop Switzerland's railroads. It was one of the biggest consumer banks in Switzerland. But more importantly, it managed money for some of the world's wealthiest people. Credit Suisse did not face the same problem that Silicon Valley Bank did. But banking is a confidence game. Once people's confidence is rattled, they start to worry about the whole system, and they start looking to see if there are any problems they need to worry about with their own banks. Credit Suisse, despite its pedigree, was the weakest of the world's biggest banks. Many of its customers were sophisticated people with a lot to lose. They didn't want to take any chances. And honestly, many people were moving their money out of Credit Suisse even before March. But what happened at Silicon Valley Bank was enough to make people look closer at the stability of their own banks. And a lot of Credit Suisse customers didn't like what they saw. Not for the same reasons, but they had other reasons to question Credit Suisse's long-term stability. And so there was a bank run on Credit Suisse too. Again, they had the assets to give depositors their money back. And again, they didn't have it right away, and the Swiss government stepped in to arrange a rescue. The government provided some liquidity and arranged for UBS, its rival, to take over Credit Suisse's business. There were some other tremors in the US market. There was a run on Signature Bank in New York. Silvergate Bank was the bank of many crypto firms. Same deal. They were both liquidated. Signature Bank was the third biggest bank failure in US history. A couple others teetered on the edge, but survived. It appears to be over, but this was almost a textbook example of how banking is a delicate confidence game that can be shaken by unpredictable events. I didn't mean for lesson 540 to be a preview of what was to come, but it did turn out to be timely. Hey, listen, I need your help with something. You may or may not have noticed that I'm not the biggest Instagram user. And for a long time, we just posted graphics of lessons, and we didn't pay much attention to our Instagram account here at Plain English. But all of that is changing. I recently did a refresh of the account and will be posting stories, posts, all kinds of stuff. So I wanted to ask for your help. Go find us on Instagram. The link will be in the show notes to this lesson. But you can find us at Plain English Pod, Plain English Pod, on Instagram. Follow the account, like the posts that you like the most, and leave comments. And we'll create more posts based on the feedback you give us. So make sure to do that. Leave comments, react to the stories, send messages. I check it every day, so I'm looking forward to seeing you on Instagram at Plain English Pod. Today's expression is herd mentality. The herd mentality is a term we use to describe the behavior of crowds. A herd is a group of animals that all move together. So if you go out into the wild, as I occasionally do, you might see animals like buffalo, zebras, deer, whatever. And big groups of them move together. They graze, they hunt, they protect each other, but most importantly, they travel together. The herd moves in the same direction. No one member of the herd wanders off into a different direction. Now, humans can be like that too, but not for grazing or hunting. We like to be part of the crowd. We feel safety when others are doing the same things that we do. And so humans display the herd mentality when they do the same thing or they move in the same direction as a lot of other people. When people follow the crowd, especially for something new, they display the herd mentality. This can be good or bad, but we often use this term when individual people do things that they wouldn't necessarily do by themselves, but they do it because so many others are doing it. Here are a few examples of people displaying the herd mentality. GameStop. Do you remember that? This is a mediocre retailer of physical video games in the United States, but for whatever reason, it became popular on Reddit. The reason was not the strength of the business. It became popular because it was popular with other people. It still is. The stock is not as high as when it was in the news, but it's still 20 times higher than before this GameStop mania. Now look at a chart of GameStop's stock, and you will see the herd mentality at work. Panic buying is another great example of the herd mentality. What were stores like when the pandemic started? In Chicago, people were panic buying. You could not find toilet paper at Target. This was irrational. The paper companies were making just as much as they always were making. Trucks were delivering to stores. People's demand was no higher during the pandemic than at other times, but people acted as a herd. One person irrationally stocked up. Then someone else did. Then everyone saw others buying basics and they cleared the shelves. This was the herd mentality. Rioting and looting is another example. When there are large protests, people sometimes burn cars, smash windows, loot stores, whatever. And afterward, they arrest people and interview them. And we find out that many of the people arrested would not have burned a police car on their own on any other day of the week, but they did it as part of a crowd that was acting similarly. They followed the herd. The herd mentality took over. And so that's what happened also at Silicon Valley Bank. The bank had all the assets it needed to back up the deposits. Now, like most banks, it couldn't access that money immediately. Like most banks, it didn't have to until there was a run, and all of a sudden people started moving their money out of the bank in a herd. I'm not saying there was nothing wrong. The bank should have hedged its interest rate exposure. But the real story is how quickly so many of the customers did the same thing. All of a sudden, people who never thought about the safety of their bank were worried about Silicon Valley Bank based on a footnote in their financial statements. And in a day, 2 days max, they withdrew enough money to topple the bank. It was the herd mentality at work. Here's a quote tailor-made for the age of ChatGPT. It's by Jules Verne, a French science fiction author. He said, "In consequence of inventing machines, Men will be devoured by them. Devoured means eaten by them. I don't know, that seems like the fear of science fiction writers, but it never quite becomes true. But we are in a new age of artificial intelligence. In consequence of inventing machines, men will be devoured by them, according to Jules Verne. And that's all for today's Plain English. Remember, I need your help on Instagram. I need some encouragement from you all. We've refreshed the account, and I want to connect with as many of you on there as possible. So check it out at Plain English Pod. Leave comments on the content you like, and I'll make more of it. I check the messages every day, so I'd love to get to know you on there. Our name on Instagram is at Plain English Pod. Coming up on Thursday, a blob of seaweed is floating toward the beaches of Florida, Mexico, and the Caribbean. And the blob threatens summer tourism and local ecosystems. That's on Thursday. See you then.